So we're changing these side shaft seals. As you can see, they've been extracted on both sides. All the differentials have been removed, and we're ready for seal replacement. Okay, I've now installed the seals. As you can see, I made up a homemade seal installer. Just trying to swing a hammer inside this housing to try and install those seals is very hard. This is a very simple piece of 12mm threaded bar with two nuts, two big penny washers on each end, pushing against two sockets that fit nicely inside each seal. These ones are actually a 34mm socket, but whatever you can find will work. And a couple of times I had to take the whole tool out, put the socket back in, and then put a wooden drift in just to straighten the seal every so often. But once it was in, it was in. It went home very easily. Very pleased with that. Okay, well, seals are now driven in, as you can see. They're in place. Everything looks good. Giving the bell housing a good clean. Got to make sure that everything's out here. There was a fair amount of debris in this little sink here, so this is all cleaned out. Give it a good wash out, make sure the pinion gear is nicely clean, and it's now time to put the differential back in. Haha. This might seem unconventional, but I've basically got a halogen light bulb in the bell housing. Reason being, I'm trying to warm up the bell housing to basically make it expand, and I've put the diff assembly in the freezer, in the deep freeze. Reason being is that when I took this differential out, the clearances between here were very tight. And I've looked on YouTube, and some people just seem to drop out in their hands, but this one was very tight, and I had to use a pry bar under the gear cage to actually pry the differential out of the bell housing. And I feel that there's going to be a problem putting it back in, so by heating it up with this halogen bulb, I mean, it's quite warm now. This should have expanded quite a bit, and by putting the diff assembly in the freezer, should create a difference, a dimensional difference, and it should hopefully slide back in easily. We'll find out now. The freezer job seemed to work, and I've got the spacers in, and they're driving in very, very easy, I'm pleased to say. I'm very, very pleased that it's going in. So yeah, that bit worked. Be back in a moment. I'm very pleased with the outcome of this. As I said, when I've originally tried to take this out, it was very, very tight. I've watched guys on YouTube using winches and all sorts, but I had to use basically a crowbar or pry bar in the cage, and with a piece of wood here to very carefully pull this out. It was a job to take out. As I said, now I've installed it. I put this in the deep freeze. I warmed this up, as you saw earlier, with the light bulb, and it's worked very, very well. It just slid in, just a little bit of light drifting to get the spacer in. Remember, these two spacers here have got to go in, and make sure you don't mix them up. Do not mix them up. Keep left and right. Same with the journals as well, the bearing journals as well. You don't mix them up. Keep them on the right side, otherwise you'll have problems with clearances and so forth, as I've read on YouTube. But yes, it's all back in. Very pleased. Now it's time to put the bearing caps back on, and hey, I'm very pleased with this. Going very, very well. I've allowed the temperature to equalize between this and the casing before you do the final torque check on your bearing caps, otherwise you could have an issue there. So let the temperature normalize, and then so they equalize, and then do your torque check. And before closing this up, make sure you give a good lubrication because everything's dry here, so at least give it a bit of a fighting chance. Make sure you put a bit of oil on your bearings before you assemble them, and make sure you give it a good squirt around in here, just so give it a bit of a pre-lube before you close up here. Now ready for the installation of the side shafts. Make sure your splines are clean, and also give it a pre-lube with the approved Mopar 75W140 oil. And it'd be a good idea to give the inside of your axle barrel a bit of a clean, because otherwise you'll be dragging all the dirt down on your splines into the actual differential, which you don't want to do. So make sure it's clean inside there before stuffing it down in there. Okay. Both side shafts are now installed. This is actually a new one. This is my new one. The reason for this job was to change, put a new side shaft. This CV joint had gone. It's a little bit of a game putting it down the barrel, but actually it engaged with the differential very easy. It wasn't hard. This was a 5-minute job doing this bit. So both axles are now in. Now I just got to put the hubs back on, and that's the next task. Okay, the hub's back on now. It's installed basically by let's see if I can get it around here. 3 13mm size bolts on each side. Taking it off, I mean, a lot of YouTube videos seem to show people having a real problem having to put pry bars and chisels behind it to pop this off, but I don't live in a salty environment. I'm in a desert, so these just came off very, very easy. So as I said, it's a 13mm socket to actually remove this hub. Very easy to do. Okay, it's now time to put the brake disc back on. As I said, I haven't tightened the hub nut yet, because I'll basically use, once I put the calipers back on, which are wired up here at the moment to stop them hanging, once I put the calipers back on, then I'll just jam a screwdriver through here, and then I can actually then put a good torque loading on this. So let's do that. Okay, so I've now installed the brake caliper, and basically it's held on with two, you can just see it down here, with two, there it is, right there, two 19mm bolts, and there's another one up here, and they're pretty easy to install. Once that's on, then your brake caliper and your brake disc are now attached. Now it's time to torque up the big mama. Ready now to torque up the hub. As you can see, I've just put a screwdriver down through the ventilating holes on the brake disc and jam it between the caliper. I've got my biggest knuckle bar that I have, plus this is my aftermarket axle that I've just replaced. So it came with a 32mm axle nut. Now to get the torque up, I've got my friendly bit of neighborhood water pipe, which I'll then put on the end of this knuckle bar to tighten up the hub. And this is actually how I undid it. You don't need a rattle gun to undo it. You just use a big piece of pipe and a good strong half-inch, 3/4 inch, sorry, knuckle bar, and off you go. It works a treat. Okay, we're back at the diff, and I'm now ready to put the end cap on. You've got to make sure this is very clean, very, very clean. Use a bit of Scotch-Brite on it to get any old sealant off there. Make sure there's no grease on it. Same for the end plate itself. Make sure it's very clean. This is not really an issue here. It's this surface here that's an issue. Make sure it's degreased and ready to take the red high temp RTV. I've now put a bead of sealant all the way around on the cover plate. Try not to put too much on. I don't want too much oozing back into the gearbox. And hopefully this doesn't leak. Let's see what happens. Okay, front cover is now on. As you can see, the sealant is oozing out. Not too much came out, which is good indicator. I let the sealant go off for a little bit before I put the plate on, so it wasn't too squishy. I've removed the plug now, ready for oil fill, but I'm going to have to give the sealant a couple of hours to go off before I start doing that. And then the last bit is putting the steering crossbar back on, reattaching that. I mean, it's a convenience thing. It just gives you more space to work with this out the way. I had to use a little puller to actually crack this as a tapered fitting, but apparently if you get two hammers, a reaction hammer, put a lump of metal on this side and hit it with a hammer on the other side, it'll do the same job, but I don't know, I don't like doing that. So I just bought myself a little two-arm puller to extract that, just so that I could drop this steering cross beam out the way. Just made it a lot easier to work on. And this, everyone, is my pile of tools that I used for the job. Very simple. That's all I use. And oh yeah, and then we've got the big friendly piece of water pipe, which was a torque enhancer. But that was it. That's all the tools that we used.